my name is Luis. I'm from Brazil, and it's a pleasure for me to be with you guys and to make this interview. Yesterday I was at the premiere of the movie. I think Robert have done a great job. I know so much about the music, but now I think I really know something special about you guys, and think our the audience gonna love it. So I'm gonna ask you first, how about the process of the movie? There's so many images from the early 60s. I think it was really hard for the production team to make that happen. And I saw you all guys were interviewed. So I want to ask you, each one of you, about the process of the movie, how it was for you guys.
Well, I must admit to having my real doubts before this movie was made, because we weren't managed very well in the early days, and nobody took any care to make sure that the stuff that we'd recorded from a video point of view was ever kept, or from a visual point of view was ever kept. And so I didn't think there was really enough archival material to actually make a movie. But I have to take my hat off to Robert Schartzman. I mean, what he found from the vaults was absolutely amazing. And also from a personal point of view. I mean, I told him one story at one moment about my father. He asked me, was there any music in your family? And I said, and I explained, you know, that my parents loved music, but my father actually met my mother when he was 17 because he was playing in his own dance band that he just formed. And he played in a band from the age of 17 to the age of 83, which everyone thought was ridiculous.
Such an example for everybody.
We're sort of not too far away from getting there ourselves, you know. And the fact that he found some footage of my father playing, and that's a tiny thing, I know, but to find video of us before we'd ever signed any record contract, when I imagined us, I could see how the others were reacting when they were playing. I imagined myself in my own head as being really cool and sophisticated when I was playing. And when I saw myself on film, it's like this mad muppet, you know. But honestly, the way he weaved the story together, the pace of the movie, it went from amusing things instantly to something that was fascinating, things that I didn't even know about the band. And it sort of charted our coming together at such an early age. And I think we have formed a close bond. We don't see too much of Hugh and Chris these days because Colin and we have a sort of current version of the band which we love very much. But as soon as we see each other again, it's like sort of and Chris's jokes, he wheels up the same jokes, which is fantastic. Really.
Yeah, we still laugh at them.
You still laugh at them. That's the most important.
Yeah. But anyway, I thought he did the most wonderful job, and it was very moving in places as well, which I wasn't expecting at all. And some of the footage about Paul. And sadly dying, but we all attended his concert and played with him for the final time because he wanted to prove to his kids that he wasn't making all this up. And pictures of him playing, looking skeletal, but with morphine in his arm, but playing She's Not There and Time of the Season. And then Brian Wilson, on his request, playing Don't Worry Baby, which obviously he found a moving thing to have him sing. It was just, I teared up at that point as well. It was very emotional.
And hear Paul's voice as well.
And hear his voice,
Didn't expect it at all.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a beautiful movie. And so all my doubts were satisfied.
I visited England several times, and I know that you guys have a pub rock music culture, and also everybody sings at the church. So Colin, when you start singing, you start with this heritage, starting in the church and chorus. How it was for you at the beginning?
I come from a very musical family. I had 5 uncles who all played in bands and actually all sang very well. They understood harmony, and they were stunning singers. That only happened when I was very young. When I was about 7 or 8, a lot of my family moved to New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the family broke up. So I do have those memories of when I was very young. But I didn't have any really formal musical education at all until we got together in this band. I had a guitar and I loved to play by myself. And I say in the film that some of my neighbours used to call me the boy who sings because they didn't know my name. But I sang, walking along the street, I sang all the time. And that's my musical education, really. I had a guitar, and then at our first rehearsal, Rod proved himself to be a master keyboard player. And so he went from being lead singer to a keyboard player. And he said, I'll do that if you'll be the lead singer, because he just heard me singing.
One song.
As I was putting my guitar away, I was
sounded great.
singing to myself. And he said, I tell you what, if you'll be the lead singer, I'll play keyboards in the band. He didn't want to play keyboards, he wanted it to be all guitar. So it was a kind of very much a chance thing. This is my audition for the whole thing. Putting the guitar away in a box, I was singing to myself, and Rod said, you be the lead singer. So there was a lot of chance and a lot of luck in me getting in the band and becoming the lead singer.
How do you guys felt nowadays, after all those times, to be remembered as such a great band? And not only remembered, it's a celebration of the music that you have made. I think in the 60s, several bands have the opportunity to play the huge audience as you guys have, but many of those bands, we lost track in time of their music. Now we have all those digital things, so I can listen a bunch of bands in a couple of minutes. But I want to know if you guys think we had to discover other bands from that period, like rediscover the Zombies. How do you feel about it?
We probably are very rare because from 60s band we still actually like each other. It's pretty unusual. We grew up together. We were all at school to start with. I joined a year after they'd started anyway. And my father played double bass, upright bass. I remember I talked to my uncle who was a musical arranger for the BBC, and they used to have family gatherings of music. And they said, your sister played piano, your dad played guitar, and I played saxophone. And he said, your mother played violin. Not very well, he said. But I never knew that. When we won this concrete contest in the 60s, we had all these offers. And then my dad said, well, talk to your uncle Ted, because he's in the music business. And he introduced us to Ken Jones, our first producer. And we've only just... Well, we had handed out music publishing ever since, and that was wonderful because we did an interview with Ken Jones, and we had all these contracts, and he went through them just advising us. There's a bad clause, that's a terrible clause, that's a good one. Rod said, I think it was Rod said, well, can you offer us anything? And he said, well, I'll give you all the best clauses in the contract. Well, that was right at our start. That was lucky.
I think when I was very young, my father was an aircraft engineer. He was with a company called De Havilland's that made...
So was Colin and my father.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. It was very similar things. And the musical background, my father played the violin, only in an amateur way, indoors. And he was always trying to get me to play it. But of course, at that time, I was at school with Rod down the end there and Paul. And of course, we were listening to the music that was beginning to come out of the States, and being really influenced by it. I mean, Elvis, Hound Dog, Little Richard, and all those wonderful rock and roll people. And it was, of course, influencing us as to the sort of direction that we thought we might take. But so I was listening to all that music. He was trying to get me to play the violin, and I thought, there's not really a lot of room in rock and roll for the violin. But at that time, and I said in this wonderful film, that I was a bit of a lazy type, really. I never really wanted to do sports. And we also had an army cadet people in our school, and you had to turn up every Friday in uniform. And I could see that the band that was part of the cadet force, all they ever seemed to do was go down the band hut and polish the drums and bugles. So I thought, I think that would be good for me. So I applied to join. First the bugles, but then I realised that the drums were up front, and that interested me even more. I took up the drums, and it came really, really, really naturally. And so sorry Dad, I'm not playing the violin, I'm taking up the drums. Can you buy me a drum set?
Watching the movie, I was really impressed about those US tours where you guys were together with a lot of different artists. And by the time it was R&B bands, soul music and rock and roll, they all came together. It was amazing to see all those bands together on one evening. Nowadays, maybe I think everything is really separated. And I also was thinking about that we can make a movie about those bus tours. And so many things that happened there.
I wish there was more footage of it, to be perfectly honest with you. But as Rod said, they didn't sort of do that thing back in those days. But yes, those tours, the American tours, the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars, which is obviously mentioned once again in the film, was really, I mean, we were just so honoured to be on that tour and playing with those wonderful people that had been influencing us, and meeting them and listening to them and talking to them, and for them to watch us too. which was, a little bit daunting, I have to say.
It was a very different time in a way, because it was before Martin Luther King was killed, and it was very much a coming together of black artists and white artists at that time. There was much less segregation in terms of what people were prepared to accept. It was a great time of coming together, and there were always a lot of black people in our audience in those days. And today, even now, after we saw a real change after Martin Luther King was killed, there was a great depression in the black community, and I can imagine that, and I can imagine why. And suddenly, we didn't used to get black people in the rock and roll audiences. And I thought that was such a shame, but at the time, in 1964, people like Patti LaBelle really became friends with us and the Bluebells, and they used to talk to us for hours about their upbringing in the black churches and how they learned to sing. And she was the person that said to us one night, there are a couple of new kids on the block, and they really were new kids on the block. No one knew about them at the time. She said that I'm going to tell you about. One is a girl called Aretha Franklin, and this was even before her Atlantic days. So this was the day when they were sort of grooming her for a cabaret sort of thing, She did, and the first thing I ever heard of hers was, "My love has no bottom, my love has no top, flip flop," and a world away from the Atlantic soul thing. But even then, there was something really special about how she sounded. And then she told us about Nina Simone, who was another very young person at that time. And we all went away, we were so impressed, and bought all her albums. And we were listening to them before a lot of people in the UK. So we were so lucky always with our timing, We bought our first record out when the Beatles had smashed down the gates in America for English groups and had gone to number one. And we got the second number one with a self-written song by an English band. And we made the 9 o'clock news in England.
She was not there.
And I remember phoning home, which, as everyone knows, in those days was a huge thing. It's not like now, we just take your iPhone. And it took ages to get through. And I spoke to my mother, I still lived at home. We were 19 years old, 18, 19 years old. And she said, "Oh, you've just been on the 9 o'clock news." And I thought, "Oh my God, what have I done?"
What I have done.
But she said, "No," and she told that story. So we were very, very lucky with our timing. A lot of, when you think about it, when we all got together, we didn't know each other, really, at all. We had our first rehearsal, and yet somehow we had a coming together of people that just, where the sort of song was great in the past, if I might say. Really. And it just gelled, and it took us a long time. We did what Dave Grohl always talks about. He said, when he said, get a group of friends, go into a garage and suck. Well, we certainly did suck for a few months. But it really...
It's a process.
It became something special. Within 2 or 3 years, we built up a huge following in St Albans, where we were. And we won a big competition, and as you know from the film, and then the whole story started. So we were very lucky with that time. But it was a very different time between black and white in those days. And the relations cooled a lot more. People were less liable to come together. Great shame.
In Brazil, when I told my mom that I'm gonna interview guys, she said to me that She's Not There was a huge success, a really big hit in Brazil in the 60s. And people there related the song with bossa nova.
That's very interesting you say that, because when Santana did it, because the guy at the Fillmore East, Bill Graham, was pressuring Carlos to do it, and he liked the song, but he said for a long time he was trying to find how he could do it to suit his style. But I always felt, right from the beginning, that it wasn't obvious at all, but it had a Latin undertone somewhere within the record, within the song. I always felt.
But it's by chance. You guys didn't was not listening bossa nova or something like that.
Well, right from the beginning, from or maybe it was a little bit later than that. Actually, when I first heard Santana, I just absolutely loved that music. I always related to Latin music and Latin rhythms, and the fact that everything was syncopated. Sorry, before the beat. I loved that everything was pushed and before the beat. I really took to that. Right.
I really think that this style opened the market for the song in Brazil.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I think that a lot of that comes from the drums as well, obviously, because Latin American music is heavily drum orientated. You look at Santana and all the percussion they have, and I think that played a little part. Maybe in the back of my mind, I didn't actually play it like that. I think there was a feeling I had maybe that was a bit like that.
Time of the Season, by the other hand, was not a big hit in Brazil.
It wasn't.
It wasn't. Only many years ago, I think people started listening in the 80s or the 90s. I remember the first time I heard you guys, I bought a soundtrack from the movie 1969. And I listened so many times that it's damaged the record.
It's interesting to note, by the way, I mean, this is a sideline story here, but we were watching Friends on TV. Well, my wife, she loves Friends. And only today, the episode that has Time of the Season in it
today
was playing.
Movies have a big hold for people listening to your songs.
We're really fortunate that so many of our songs have been in films and also commercials. It's really strange. Also, Time of the Season was never a hit in the UK. Wow. The same as Brazil. But
came out 5 times.
Yes, but Time of the Season is by far our biggest record worldwide. It's so strange that from different countries, in some countries it will be a huge hit. It's the same song. When you go to another country and it's not a hit at all. It's always intrigued me that. It's just what appeals to different countries, different territories.
A lot of but all the media know it. I'm playing it. Even though it was never a hit. And
Well, I mean, in the UK, the public know it.
The public all know it, all the young people know it.
For a large extent, it's because it's been in so many commercials, so many films. And people, they think that it was a hit record, but it wasn't.
I want to ask you guys, why do you think that it was not launched by the time as a single from Odessey and Oracle?
Because all of our records share this in common. When She's Not There was first signed, the record company liked it. They didn't think it was commercial. Because we never copied exactly what was going on, ever. And sometimes a lot of record company executives wanted you to do what was currently on the charts or whatever.
Like a formula to repeat the songs.
And we can't write like that. I mean, I certainly can't write like that. I have to get excited about an idea and then we all get together and we put our own input into what was going on. And when She's Not There first came out, it was shunted, even though we got a deal, it was shunted onto a smaller branch of the record label, but it became a #1 record. Time of the Season wasn't ever going to get released, and it was only because Al Cooper believed in it so much that he almost forced Columbia at that time to put it out, because they were saying, well, we put 2 things out from the album, it hasn't done anything, we're going to move on. And he said, you've got to release Time of the Season, you have to release something. And of course it became a #1 record in the States. So record companies never believe that these things are commercial, It's really funny.
It's different. Maybe they felt it like a risk.
What they did.
Yeah, especially American recorders, I think, in those days, they always wanted more of the same. And actually, I can remember us being sat down and someone would put on the #1 record at the time and they would say, this is what we
Listen
want.
to that.
That's ridiculous because by the time we've written something in that vein and recorded it and they've marketed it and promoted it, that's all gone. That has never appealed to us anyway.
We always wanted to be true to ourselves.
Yes, we want to write what comes from the heart.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to ask you guys about Elvis Presley influence. Nowadays, a lot of people want to dismiss his importance in rock and roll. I used to listen to people say things, no, Elvis is a thief. He takes the music from the black people and things like that. Especially in Brazil, when Elvis movies was playing there, I asked one of my friends, let's watch the movie. It's a great movie by chance. And a lot of people say, no, Elvis Presley is not the king of rock and roll. And I argue with everybody because it's not true. Because he brings all the music from all kinds of people. Yeah. He play Chuck Berry songs, Little Richard songs. But I want to listen for you that you guys were there in the 60s, 50s. What was the impact for you guys, and what do you think about that?
Particularly important his early days.
Sure.
3 years.
First 3 years, yeah. Before the army.
Rod will tell you in a minute the impact he had on him, but if I could just say, those early years are really, really important. By the time he was making those films, he made sort of 20 films, and he'd become a commodity. And, it was a different thing. But Rod, you explain about your...
Oh, geez. I mean, I can still see myself in the room in 1956, when my older cousin Jim Rothford, who I later became members of my bands, etc., he played me Elvis, and my whole world turned around. I love classical music up to that point, but my world was turned around. And your friends are right when they say to you that he took black music. It's not stealing it. It was he was just infused with what he heard, and he was the first guy. For me, he turned me onto black music by proxy. In the first 3 years, I think his voice was transcendent, and I still got his records on my jukebox at home.
But Rod, he was showing black music to a white audience that may never have appreciated that music, you know, because it was wonderful, wonderful music.
And that's what made him the legend that he is and was and will forever be, and so much influence on so many people, not just in America, but of course
all over the world. Rock and roll.
Exactly.
We listen in Brazil, Mexico, and every place.
When we were touring in 1965, we were slightly embarrassed because we were on coaches with all these wonderful black acts, and we were slightly nervous because we were English people singing
American music.
And they said, well, no, they said, this is great, they said, because it's increased visualization of what we're doing. So they were pleased that the white people were doing the black music, recognizing where it came from.
But it's also very hard to realise now. You had to be a certain age at that time. When Elvis made That's All Right Mama and his early things, a lot of radio stations, a lot of black DJs thought he was black. And it's very hard for us to realise that now. But he infused his singing with the soul of what black music was. He understood it and he loved it and he celebrated it. And they saw him that way. They did. It was absolutely great. I think it's like when we were first heard the Beatles. You have to be of a certain age to really feel the power with all the surrounding situation. You have to feel the power of how important that felt at that time. It was just life-changing, it really was.
The Beatles, of course, were in many ways similar to us. 4 people who got together and found a certain bond between themselves, which of course came through in their music, much like us.
I think the British invasion, in many ways, saved rock and roll, because many of rock and roll artists after this, Elvis was in the army, and most of them had a lot of problems at the early 60s. Chuck Berry was arrested and things like that. And I think that British invasion made rock and roll happen again.
Be rejuvenated.
Yeah.
I mean, it all started in America, the same as the blues and jazz. And that's why so many British musicians really want to play in America, because that's where it all started. But you've got a good point there. Maybe things were a bit in the doldrums, and British invasion really helped. I have to say that, me personally, I was never aware of us being part of a British invasion or the social change that came about in tune with the British invasion. I'm rather embarrassed to say that. I was thinking more in terms of what we were doing day by day. Where were we playing tonight? Who's got a new song? What's the next recording date? But it's interesting when you read back now, and people do see it as a shift in society when, a great social change when the British invasion. I think it's just been shot. No, please. But personally, at the time, and I'm embarrassed to say it, I didn't see it that way.
Did you guys return to Philippines after all those amazing gigs that you guys?
We have, and we played
as a band, as your band.
Yes, and we played the same place.
Wow, cool.
The Odessey Coliseum. It had changed. It was very different.
Still big.
It's big. It didn't hold as many people because they've got proper plush seats. I seem to remember they just had wooden benches when we went there, and the place was crammed. So I thought in terms of the first night was 28,000, and it was a matinee of 15,000 on the Saturday, and Saturday night was 32,000. But we might have all been told slightly different figures, but it was a lot of people. When we went back more recently, it only held 15,000 people, I think. So it had changed quite a lot. but so many memories when we went back there, because we were virtually prisoners. This is a huge building, and it had a hotel built in and a restaurant built in and a swimming pool where we were allowed to go. And the promoter, Mr. Araneta, didn't want us to leave at all, probably for many reasons, but he would say it's not really safe for us to leave. But we used to get shut in the boot, the back of a car, and Brazil, do you call that the boot? Or the trunk. The trunk.
Wow.
We would get in the back of the car or have blankets over us, and we would leave out of the security where these guys, they have machine guns, and we would get out to go to parties and things like that.
I think that was to keep us in, actually.
Yes, it was. It was a very strange time. And quite frightening to live. It was scary.
Well, when we played
so
there,
many people, and a political situation there was really confused as well.
When we played there again, not that long ago, with Colin and I, and the current band, Imelda Marcos came again.
Yeah, I came again.
She came. And they said,
want to buy some shoes, sir?
she was a congresswoman. She's a congresswoman in her own right. When we played, now her son is president.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was in the audience, and they said to me, would you mind introducing Congresswoman Imelda Marcos to the audience? And then she would stand up and take a bow. And I thought, well, okay, I'll do this. So I go out there, and the audience is all in darkness. The lights are all on us. I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to introduce Congresswoman Imelda Marcos. And I looked down at the front row and I could see a party of people with women in sparkly dresses. So I presumed that was her. I went, we'd like to introduce Imelda Marcos. And the lights all went down there, and they were the backing singers from the band that had opened for us in the show. And all the lights got on her, and Imelda Marcos was standing up at the back in the darkness.
Standing up in darkness.
It was better this way.
It's funny because when we were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Brian May came backstage as we were doing an interview, and he said, just like to say how much you influenced Queen.
Your music changed in the 60s from the first recordings to Odessey and Oracle. And what kind of influences do you guys brought to Odessey and Oracle?
Well, the thing is that Chris and I particularly, but the whole band actually, became very frustrated with the way our recent singles before Odessey and Oracle had been sounding. Very frustrating because I would write singles, or sometimes Chris would write singles, and they seem to have the strength taken out of them in the mixing and the production, and they weren't how we heard them in our minds, and the harmonies weren't appearing as we heard them in our minds. So we desperately wanted to do an album ourselves and produce it. Didn't know if we could, as I say in the movie, but we wanted to get out at least a concept of how, when we wrote the songs and rehearsed them, we thought they would sound. And so we made an album, and we were knocked out, really, all of us. We really enjoyed the whole process because we ended up with our songs sounding very much, as for better or worse, as we heard them in our heads. And that was the main thing about Odessey and Oracle. That's really why we did it, because it was in the air that the band, may split for various reasons, and we just wanted to have that heritage to get some songs down in the way that we heard them, and not the producers. So that,
but also for me, I think one of the main progressions was in the songwriting. When we first started, She's Not There was probably the second song Lord had ever written. I didn't know he could write songs, so I never heard the first song, but apparently She's Not There is the second song. And Chris, I don't know if you've ever written the song before, but they progressed as writers, and I think that every track on Odessey and Oracle, regardless of it being recorded in Abbey Road and the engineers and the performances, the songs are magical. Every song is a minor masterpiece. There are 12 tracks on there. There are no flaws.
Well, experience will dictate. The more you write, and I'm not a songwriter, and I wish I was, but there you are. Experience, the more you write, I would say, would make you improve and improve and improve. So I think that's what happened when we finally got to Odessey and Oracle. these wonderful guys have written so much better songs, better crafted, better, more intricate, more I don't know, just clever songs.
Sophisticated.
That's a good word.
Not only that, we had £1,000 to do the whole album, and it was on four tracks. So it was an adventure for Rod and myself, producing.
This pressure probably helps in a way.
It can do.
Yeah.
It can be great to have limits.
We were very strict in rehearsing all those songs before we got to the studio. So many people write and rehearse in the studio, and it's very expensive.
Very expensive.
The songs were written outside of the studio, and they were rehearsed extensively outside of the studio, so that we knew the songs, we knew the keys, we knew the arrangements, and we're just looking for the performance. I said that in the film already. So we could record very quickly.
How it was by the time to watch such great artists in those tours like The Searchers, Shangri-La's, and especially Beach Boys? They were huge in the US. How it was for you guys to watch those artists playing?
Well, we worked with a lot of them. We used to do those mass tours where you played 2 or 3 tracks, like we toured with the Isley Brothers and Dale Morrick and Dusty Springfield.
I think when you're really young, and this is only true when you're really young, but you kind of take these things a little bit for granted, especially once we got rolling. To start with, we were a little bit in awe of everyone. But after a few months, you just kind of take it for granted a little bit, and it just becomes more important. Where are we playing tomorrow night? What hotel are we staying in? Rather than we are playing with these wonderful musicians who will be known, their music will be known forever. You're not really thinking of it. I wasn't thinking.
How long was the set of you guys by the time? How long was the set?
We play at least an hour.
Well, it depended. If we were on our own, it would be at least an hour. But on those tours, package tours, 3 songs, I think, at the most.
Okay.
Sometimes it would be 1 song. And you just accepted that because that was the norm. Everyone did the same thing. You would be on, sing a song, and off so quick.
But the question you introduced there about the music influence around that time with all those bands, I think certainly from a writing point of view that was very important because it felt generally as a time of great progression in writing and music, and things were more deeply looked into by the writers. And I remember hearing Pet Sounds and just absolutely loving the way it was put together. It was very much akin to sort of classical music with wonderfully orchestrated parts. And from a personal point of view, I found that very exciting. And I think it influenced my writing to the extent that I always loved writing bass parts right from the beginning of writing songs. And I would always love to write bass parts that had maybe a different root note than the root note of the chord. So if it was a chord of C, I might put an F in the bass. And also I would love melodic bass lines. And around the time of Pet Sounds, and also what the Beatles were doing, because McCartney was a wonderfully fluid and melodic bass player as well, and I loved that. But that was always in my makeup. But what was happening at that time, I found very exciting and stimulating to actually develop those areas that I thought I already had to some degree. But I found it very exciting that they were pushing forward in those areas and making the music more complex and sophisticated. And I found that very exciting. And the thing is, the reason why, just personally, I'm in this business always, is to try and be creative all the time. And I get all my energy from the fact that when we're creating new stuff, and that's what I find so exciting. So I think you're right. I think it was a time that was very exciting to be recording and writing, and all the things that were in the air about the sort of peace movement. And I know there's a lot of naivety as well. It was the first time that people were looking at footage from the Vietnam War, for instance, and not just seeing a jingoistic view, if you know what that
or
is.
Or propaganda.
Yeah, propaganda. Because they were actually seeing napalm. I mean, the pictures were very innocent by today's standards, but it was a real revolution at the time. And a lot of young people were saying, we don't want to be part of this war. And more than that, we're going to refuse to be part of this war. And that created a huge sort of spiritual uplift in how people were thinking. And it ended up with some not very good music, but it ended up with some wonderful answers as well, the way people were thinking. I think it was an exciting time at that time.
I think nowadays we have maybe a similarity in the moment of the world, where we now have so many wars, like Ukrainian war, and so many societies is so much divided.
Yeah.
Like after Martin Luther King died.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think that nowadays we have to learn something from that era.
Yes.
So many things, people are talking about war and things like that, and few people talking about peace.
Yeah.
And peace is really more important than war.
So more people talking about peace. Let's have more people trying to create peace. And let's stop these wars. Get a bit political now, sorry.
Yeah, it's a change because we're in 2023, guys, and doing the same mistakes, the politicians and everything.
We have to remind people what it's like if people don't trust each other or they fight. They think it's the only way to solve things.
But everything is so global now, and we know immediately what's happened. We know what Putin did last night.
Yeah, exactly.
And we know how many hypersonic missiles were sent over, etc., etc. Even back in the 60s, things were much slower than that. So that globalization makes reactions very much quicker and more severe and instant as well. So, the world is changing, obviously, with communication.
There's cyber war now, so you don't even see it happening.
You are the one who started the engine of the motorcycle on Shangri-La's concert.
Yes, I was the only person who could get the bike started.
Great to be with those girls on stage and doing the motorcycle part.
Actually was behind the backdrop curtain.
Okay.
So I got to know that song quite well.
Do you know there was another thing in that that sometimes people don't remember? They used to give him a great big kiss sometimes.
Okay.
And I would have to walk up and kiss on the cheek.
I'm going to ask you if you have any other story that's not in the movie that is worth to share with people.
We had to kill them first.
I was thinking of one a little bit earlier, funny enough. Funny you should talk about whatever it was at the time, but talking about communication and the difficulty that it was then. Nowadays, mobile phones, we can be in contact with anything and we can learn anything in a second. But we were on one of those tours back in the 60s there in America, and I got taken ill. We were out on the road and we stopped for a bite to eat or something. I had a piece of dodgy apple pie.
You got quite sick.
I did get sick, and I couldn't play that. I had to go to the hospital, and with basically food poisoning. So I don't know who played for you that night.
There's probably something.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realise until I got home, that I'd made the front page of what we now know as the Evening Standard.
Oh, did you?
I did.
Yeah.
There was a picture of me, drummer of the Zombies, taken ill. And at the time, my father, as I said, worked at the aircraft factory, and as was his wont, he would pick up the paper on the way home, tuck it under his arm, and cycle home. And so he must have gone indoors, sat down, and opened the paper to see his son on the front page. And I couldn't get to him and tell him. Just tell him no.
So hard to communicate.
Absolutely.
You live in Menorca Island.
I do, yes.
How is it to live there? Summer almost all the time.
What happened was we'd thought about it. My wife's brother had moved there some years before, and so we used to go out and see him, and we both fell in love with the island. It's just its peace and tranquility and beauty, but we couldn't do anything about it for a while. Our children were still that little bit young and hadn't really run out into the big wide world. My wife still had parents, and when her father died, and the children were going around the world, and we said, well, there's no real ties to keep us in England anymore. And we did like Menorca, so we said, shall we move there? I tried it, and I thought, she's going to say no. But she didn't. She said, I think it's a great idea. And that's why we're there. And love it. And I have a great scene there with a lot of English people, and I play in a band there, and I love that too. I
hope to be in Menorca sometime, and maybe I catch you playing.
Yes, absolutely.
And where do you live?
In Salisbury, which is in Stonehenge.
I was there last year. First time in Stonehenge.
He's nearly as old as
And Colin, where you live?
I live southwest of London, on the outskirts of a town called Woking. I don't live in Woking, but Woking, Guildford, this sort of area. And an hour southwest from me is Rod. So it makes it quite simple for us. Rod writes a song, he'll call me, and I can get to him really quickly. And that's the beginning of the process. We go through the song just round the piano, just the two of us, before the song's played. Even that's played. Yeah.
Yesterday I was listening your new single, Merry Go Round. What do you guys have to say about the inspiration, the process of producing it and composing it?
The whole thing about the new album was that we very much wanted to go back. I mean, I've done a lot of record production. I've done it in all sorts of ways, and I had quite a lot of success. So I do know the processes. We've lived in our place for the last 8 years. Before that, we were 38 years somewhere else. So I had a new studio built, but it was within the existing outbuilding. It's only small, but I managed to get the acoustic engineer that did Abbey Road, that made Abbey Road, and the acoustics in the studio are just fantastic. And I wanted to produce this new album there in the way that we did Odessey and Oracle, because we very much wanted to have our own ideas on that. I wanted this to be a self-production from beginning to end. So, for better or worse, wanted as close as I could get the vision of how I saw the songs that I'd written be realised on record. And the other thing we wanted to do was go back to the way of recording where we all played at the same time together, not laid down one track and then another track and then another track. And after we were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the present band had been on a long tour in America, and I thought we'd never played so well. So we couldn't wait to get back and start recording. We recorded Merry Go Round and another track on the album called Runaway, and we really liked how it turned out. So we were raring to go, and then COVID with a vengeance. And it slowed down the whole process and meant, particularly our bass player now comes from Denmark, but even the guys in England, we couldn't get together for about 18 months or even longer. But we waited, but that was an important factor of how we saw this album. And we had a ball doing it. Everyone loved recording the whole thing because it felt very honest, and everybody would bounce off each other. So the musicians would subtly alter what they were playing as to what other people were playing. Colin's guide vocal would change a little bit because of what he was hearing. We would change what we were playing a little bit by how Colin was singing. And we would then add harmonies afterwards, but the meat of it, each of the tracks was really done in about, I would say, 4 or 5 hours. And we had a ball doing it. It was just wonderful. And the initial reaction we've got from the industry, because the album's not out until the 31st of March, in America and in the UK, it's been absolutely stunning. And people are saying it's the best album we've had since.
Sounds amazing.
Odessey and Oracle. So it's a very joyful experience for us, and we've had a ball doing it. And I can't. I mean, the thing was, because we had COVID, that was frustrating, but it gave me the peace and time to write the material. And then if I'd lost the thread of something that I was working on, I could just go away for 2 or 3 days and then walk back into the studio, because everything was as I'd left it, and you could continue the process. There was no pressure like that. So it was a lovely experience, actually.
Pinch me right now.
Aren't you the director of that film that we saw last night?
Guys, I really appreciate so much you have the time to talk with me. I hope to see you guys in Brazil. And if you have one last thing to say and to send a message to Brazilian audience, some last moment that we have.
You have some great natural musicians imbued with Brazilian music in Brazil. Great sense of rhythm, great feeling. If you're going to work in this industry, always do things for real and try and stay true to yourself. That's what I'm saying.
And I hope you can come down and play in Brazil sometime as well. I think we would all love to play.
Yeah, sure. People will love to see you there. Thank you so much again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luis.